Hello, everyone. I hope you're all healthy and safe. In front of AmCham team, I would like to welcome you all to this second in a row online workshop with our friend, Dr. Nicolaos Dimitriadis. Last time, a month ago, we had our first online session with Nikos on how to help our brain go through difficult times, and then we promised to continue with another briefing on a similar topic, so here we are. Topic of today's session is empathy. Simple word, but very complex, very important, and I would say a powerful ability needed in everyday life, in every relationship, and in everyday business, especially in some unusual circumstances. Empathy raises lots of questions. For example, how easy or how challenging is to step in someone else's shoes, to see, listen, and feel with someone else's eyes, ears, and heart. And if it's not easy, what we can do to improve and erase this ability. What about leadership? How important empathy is from that point of view? Is it an essential quality for a true leader? What happens with our brain? How it works from a neuroscience perspective? So lots of questions, but all answers to these questions Nikos is going to share with us today. I might invite you all to post your comments and questions through chat, but after the presentation you can do that directly if you prefer. Before Nikos starts, just a short introduction in case someone is not familiar with his background, which I really doubt, but just a few sentences. So our guest is an award-winning communications professional, educator, and consultant. He is the CEO of Trisma Neuro, a cutting-edge neuromarketing company, and the regional director of the University of Sheffield International Faculty City College for the Western Balkans. So Nikos, thank you very much for being here with us today, and please, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for having me. Tina, thank you for the introduction. It is a pleasure to have a second webinar within the crisis and the pandemic and the lockdown. The lockdown is a little bit relaxing. In Serbia, we have finished with the police hours, but this doesn't mean that the conditions that created this lockdown and many of the restrictions that we experienced before, they all of a sudden disappeared. No, they have not, and they will continue, some of them with an unpredictable duration. Okay, so the challenges remain, and maybe some of them will become even stronger. Now, the solution to these challenges, if you ask me, what was the one thing, you know, these clickbait articles, you know, the one solution, the one thing you should do. So if you ask me, Nikos, tell me one thing, what this crisis should teach us, and what is the one thing we need to carry, to first of all, employ and work within the crisis, but make sure it carries out of the crisis. There is no competition. There is one thing only. It's empathy. Okay. Now, empathy is something that we use in everyday words, you know, everyday discussions in our companies, etc. There is a lot of science behind empathy and a lot of research which I want to share with you today, so you become more aware of what empathy actually entails, what it means, and how it works in the brain in your relationships. And I will also share with you some tips and tricks of how to improve this empathy capacity that we all have. Okay, so the first seminar, it was more like a free discussion of some key ideas concerning the brain and the crisis. This time is much more structured. I prepare many slides for you. And because it's a lot of material and I really want not to hold back, I don't want to go easy on your cognitive capacity. I will go strong. So prepare, take a deep breath, have your coffee, I don't know, energy drink, whatever it makes you tick close to you. Okay, and we start. I will actually share my screen in order for you to have a view of the materials that I prepared for you. Okay, so because I'm not being able to see you now, Tina, if something goes wrong technically or my microphone, please jump in and let me know, and we will fix it. Okay, so.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So let's start. Okay, it will be a really, I hope, very interesting journey through the neuroscience, the psychology, and sometimes even the philosophy, and of course the business of empathy. Now I have to say that this seminar is more designed for empathy for you as personal development. Okay, of course we'll talk some things about brands. Of course we'll talk some things about leadership. If you are interested to see how empathy works better or should be applied in marketing strategy, of course, and in all the touch points that a brand has with its customers and extended external environment. I had a webinar a few weeks ago on the topic called Crisis and Marketing, and how empathy should be used strategically. There I talk more specifically about injecting empathy in your marketing mix, the purpose as a company, and in your brand strategy. Okay, it's on my YouTube channel. You can watch it. So if you are more interested about empathy in marketing specifically and sales, there is a lot of stuff you can get there. So the things that I will talk about today are included in the 2.5 books that I have written. I'm jokingly saying 2.5 books because my first book, Neuroscience for Leaders, which was published in 2016, now has a second edition. It's coming out in October. It was planned to come out in the summer, but because of all the challenges, because of the pandemic, it's pushed back in for October. It has 30% more neuroscience and materials, as well as specific neuroscientific research in the leadership arena and field, and it has much more exercise and things that you can do in order to improve your leadership capacity through neuroscience. There's a lot of things that I will talk today that come from that book. Also, Advanced Marketing Management, my second book that came out in the end of 2018, has a whole chapter about the empathetic product, how empathy in your marketing should not be only in communication. Say, we care about you and the blah, blah aspect of marketing, but it should be in the core of your offer to your clients. Okay, product, services, experiences, whatever you are offering as a solution to your client. So many of the things that we'll talk today are actually included in these two books, but there are other things that I will mention as well. So here you see a collection of articles that were published within the crisis that indicate the thing that I started the seminar with, that empathy, if you, again, clickbait, the one thing that is important for the crisis, the one thing to get us through the crisis, the one thing to remember after the crisis, and I will say shamelessly, it is one thing, and it's empathy. Okay, and you see here that actually there are a lot of voices that agree with that. Okay, post-pandemic, people will remember you if you led using empathy, okay, or ego. And indeed, the blog post that I wrote early in the crisis for Hemofrom Foundation indicated exactly this, that periods of crisis and uncertainty create a need in our brain for decisive solutions, for people that will lead with conviction and with empathy and will help us pass through the crisis and even come out better on the other side. It is crisis periods that push our brain to crave, to look around for leaders. You know, being a leader in a very calm period and the period of growth is a different story. In calm periods and periods of growth where everything goes well, our brain is not in a pain state, it's not in a uncertainty state, it's not in a threat recognition and increased threat management state. It's not. It's relaxed, it's happy, it's joy, it's predictability. And thus being a leader there, I would say, is easy and slash, if I want to be provocative, kind of cheap. Okay, where leadership really matters, evolutionary speaking, how we evolved as species. You know, when we were in our tribes and we had an attack from another tribe, or the resources were depleted and we had to emigrate in different savanna or fields, and this created a lot of stress, and this is where leadership matters. So it is crisis periods that make or break real leaders, okay? You see other things here. Empathy is a key element in branding. Customer empathy is the key to troubled times. Put your customers and employees first. So empathy not only outside for the customers, but empathy for inside for your employees. 3 ways to be more empathetic leader. Will companies remain empathetic? So all the things that companies are now discussing and applying in order to demonstratively show that they care about you as a customer or as an employee. Will it remain after the crisis? Or when we go to a business as usual, a new normal situation, they will forget the importance of empathy, connectivity, and helping each other. Now, these are very big questions, and I wanted to show you this in order to solidify the fact that empathy is indeed, if not the only word, one of the most important things that we need to consider during crisis and after. But when I discuss empathy, it's not only because of the crisis. Of course, the crisis created a much bigger need, a stronger need for empathy. But empathy was a discussion, and empathy was in the list. Something that Tina mentioned in the beginning. Is empathy important for leaders? Now, if you check the list that many organizations and global NGOs have published the last few years about the skills of the future. What are the necessary skills of humans for the future in schools, but also in businesses, in leadership? You would see that empathy is, in a way or another, maybe not in this specific use of words, in all lists. So empathy is a key human skill. Okay, and this is how I actually introduced myself to empathy, because for the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, I'm an empathy fanatic. I'm an advocate and an ambassador for empathy. And in all my projects, either in consulting, teaching, or in my neuromarketing company, we put empathy as a cornerstone of what we do. Actually, in my neuromarketing practice, we are one of the very few companies in the world that we have developed our own neuroscientific test to measure your empathy. Okay, I will talk about this towards the end of my speech. So I'm here to talk about empathy because I'm a passionate advocate of empathy as a key human skill. Okay, and this is why when I see things like that, you know, before the crisis, and even now, many people talk about, you know, in the new industrial revolution and Industry 4.0 and AI and machine learning and all these kind of things that we were discussing heavily before the crisis, but they are also now important part of the discussion today. Hey, hi, robot, the fourth age, robots will steal your job. There were many people that coming out and saying that 50% of all jobs can be lost because of AI in a period of few decades. Okay, so there was a lot of discussion about technology replacing human work. And this is a constant theme in economics. That's nothing new. If you take technology as a phenomenon in the economic sphere, always technology was there to replace or make easier some part of human work. Actually, if you are in this kind of topic academically, you know that in the beginning of the 90s, a guy called Rifkin published a very influential book that was called The End of Work. The End of Work. And now I'm talking about beginning mid-90s. And in his very famous back then book, he was making the case that actually technology, these new technologies we have, will actually replace almost all type of work. And it makes you wonder, what actually will be replaced? Because indeed, many companies started replacing humans with machines, and sometimes this works very well, and it works best, and it will continue, but sometimes maybe we misunderstood what makes us human and what makes machines machines, and what is the relation between the two. So maybe you've seen some I would say there were PR articles globally a few years ago about a hotel in Japan that replaced most of the staff within the hotel with robots. So maybe you've seen this picture of the dinosaur. There is a small mechanical dinosaur, like from Jurassic Park, that was the receptionist. So the receptionist was actually a robot dinosaur, and many other services were actually replaced by robots. Well, 1-2 years ago, yes, 2019, January 2019, so a year ago, the news were completely different. Actually, the hotel started replacing back AI and robots with humans because it was a complete disaster, They were malfunctioning. They were misused by people. They were not as sophisticated as they thought they were, and created so much backlash from the clients. And the reviews were so bad, and the clients were not coming back, that the hotel was pushed to bring back people and to replace the robots with humans. And there was also a story with about Toyota. The car company, has one of the most robotized production line, but either in 2018 or 2019, they reintroduced humans in some key aspects, of the production line, because robots are only executing. They cannot think creatively and find solutions proactively to problems that don't even exist. So the capacity of the human brain to connect deeply with issues and try to find problems to these issues is something that we cannot replicate. Some people say not even in the foreseeable future from the machine. So I'm saying all this because we have been so much sold this story of AI, robots, and technology replacing total human beings, that I think this shows our misunderstanding of actually a very important question. And this important question is, what makes us human? If we are in a production line just to take one point here, put it there, then like in the traditional industrial revolution kind of assembly line, if my job is mechanical, blind concerning brain processes, important brain processes, to just take one piece here and put it there, then of course technology will repair it, will replace it. But if when I took it here to put it there, I said, hey, but why I'm putting it there? Because I see the person 3 jobs down from mine is actually suffering. I recognize his and her pain. Maybe I can do something better to make his or her job better. This is the kind of brain processes that are uniquely to humans. And I don't think that I will be wrong to say that these kind of brain processes are the most difficult to replicate in machines, and kind of differentiating us strategically from machines. Okay, so I want to introduce the most important person today, which is Borat. You know Borat? You have seen the movie Borat? Borat will help us understand what makes us human. Now, of course, I'm not talking about Borat himself, but what is his name? What is the actor's name? It's Sacha Baron Cohen, right? So Sacha Baron Cohen, the actor that created Borat, has a cousin, and the cousin is called Simon Baron Cohen. So he's Sacha Baron Cohen. His cousin is Simon Baron Cohen. This is Simon Baron Cohen. Actually, do they look alike? I think they look a little bit alike. If they have some similarities. So Simon Baron Cohen, the cousin of Borat, is one of the global academic experts, scientific experts on empathy, the autistic brain, and differences between the male and female brain. Okay, so he's a great expert. I really recommend that you find his books, his research, and his methods. But some of them I will introduce today here with you to help us understand why empathy is such an important human skill, basic human function and brain function. So Simon Baron Cohen developed a test to study empathy, to see what are your empathy levels. And he found out that the way by which he can test you for your empathy level is by showing you pairs of eyes. Now, we have quite a lot of research today that shows, through what maybe you've heard is called eye tracking, that shows that when we look at pictures or other people, our eyes tend to focus in the eyes, mostly the vast part of our gaze, of our focus, is on the eyes area of the other person, and a little bit also down the nose and the mouth. It's called the empathic gaze, by the way. So he noticed that if he gave to people just the pairs of eyes, you don't even have to have the whole face of people experiencing some emotions, and he asked you, what do you think that this person is experiencing emotionally? Based on how accurate your prediction will be, your empathy can be high or low. Okay, and this research comes actually from autistic kids with autism research, because it is very known the fact that kids with autism avoid eye contact. They don't look at the eyes of another person, but down. And there was a lot of discussion of why this happens. And one of the explanations, which actually is related with empathy, is that kids with autism, when they look at the eyes of other people, the natural empathy network that we all have by looking at each other's eyes to predict what is your emotional state and your intentions, because of the emotions you feel towards me, so they don't have this natural loop of information, this radar, this natural brain radar of looking at you directly in your eyes and looking in your eyes, trying to understand what you want, what you feel. Okay, what is your state? Because this loop is broken, is not working very well, there is a lot of stress created. So the brain cannot apply normal empathetic networks and thus experience a lot of uncertainty and pain. In order to minimize their level of stress, they look down. So they cut the natural view radar because the radar is broken and it creates stress. So to avoid the stress of not understanding what you feel, they prefer to look down. So based on all this research, Simon Baron-Cohen developed this eye test, which you will take now. You will take, please write down what I will tell you, and then later you can tell us if you were correct or not. So what Simon Baron did, and you can take this test, the full test online, shows you some set pairs of eyes and asks you what is the emotion behind the eyes. So let's take the test together. Okay, as I said, please write down the emotions you think that the person is experiencing based on just the eyes. Okay, so what do you think? Tired, puzzled, angry? What is the emotion here? Okay, so the emotion here is panic. Not just fear, but panic. Now, you might say, I got it. And most of people get this one, but I have some news for you. This is the one you do before you start the real test. So this is the one, the easy one, before you go to the real test. Let's go to the real test. Okay, what about this set of eyes? Intense, interrogating you. This is playfulness. Okay, playfulness. I don't know if you were watching Friends, the series. This is how you doing. This is the playfulness of joy. Okay, what about this? What is she experiencing? What do you think? This is desire. Okay, so let's go to the next one. What about him? What is he saying? Angry, bored, tired, fear. This is insisting. Okay, and what about the last one? Now, unfortunately, I showed this to some seminars around the world, and when I said, what is he? People said, he's old. I said, okay, he's old, but that's not the point of the test, okay? So what is he experiencing? What do you think? It's more doubt. It's somebody that is looking at you and is not so much believing or buying what you are saying. Okay, so these and many others, please take the test online and find your own empathy score. So you see that there are some ways by which our evolution through our long history as human species and hominids and even before, that we have developed natural ways by which we connect to other people, and there are unconscious, very fast processes within the brain that try to collect information from the other person in order to make an assumption. It's called theory. It's called theory of mind. So in order what you are going to do. And why it's important for me to understand and feel and experience what you are feeling. Why it's important for me to decode very fast, not to take me 5 minutes, oh, what is it? Why is it important for my brain to have a radar and connect fast with your eyes and then give me the information of probably this is what you are feeling and this is what you're, because this is a matter of life and death. Because imagine if I see you out of my cave, I go out of my cave and you are there. another cave person, caveman or cave woman, and you're looking at me. Are you going to kill me? Are you going to embrace me? Are you here to help me? Are you here to steal my food? So my empathy network is a fast radar through looking at you, through first your eyes. Of course, there are other cues. It's not only the eyes, but we start from the eyes. Through looking at you, my natural empathy network will try to predict what you are going to do in order for me to adjust, adapt my behavior to what I'm expecting from you. And as I said, evolutionary speaking, through our long history living in caves and in savannas, this was a matter of life and death. Decoding your intentionality, understanding your emotional state, and how your emotions will actually lead you to do something was a matter of life or death. So empathy networks are not luxury networks. It's not good to have, are very important to have from our evolution times and even today. So the opposite of this is Homo economicus, a term that we assign to classical economic theory of what makes us human, how we make decisions. And Homo economicus, starting from the famous economists of the 18th century and onwards, that they try to understand in a world which was very different than the previous world. You know, all of a sudden with industrial revolution and all this production of products and all this global trade, you know, international trade that was open, and all these investment decisions that you could make, you know, because you could invest and create one factory there, or you invest in some boat that would go and bring some new product from Far East. How could you make these decisions? All of a sudden, you were not just living in your own village and having decisions to make, you know, I will buy meat from the local butcher and shoes from the local shoemaker. This was easier decision making, but Industrial Revolution brought much more complex choices. And economists were one of the first group of people that came out and said, okay, economists / philosophers / psychologists, they were all in one. And they started to examine and think about how people decide A on B. And their ideas back then were very calculative, very consciously driven, very analytical. And they said, actually humans, people, decide A or B based on a very dry, cold accounting calculation of what is cost and benefit. Okay, Homo economicus thinking does not allow much room for empathy, for unconscious prediction of your behavior from natural networks that try to detect your feelings in order for me then to, as I said, adapt my actions to your predicted actions. Okay, it doesn't allow much room for this. For Homo economicus, this is the cost, this is the benefit, I will do this, I will do that. Okay, and Homo economicus thinking passed in politics. It became a dogma that had a very specific view of human nature, human decision making, and human behavior. It's a very specific set of rules, very quite rigid and quite specific of what makes us human. And it ended up, you know, being in statements like this, like Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher said, there is no such thing as a society. There are individual men and women and their families, and that's it. Who cares about tribes, reference groups, communities? Who cares about this? No, it's just the individual. This statement is very consistent with the Homo economicus view of the human being, of human nature, okay? And it's quite dangerous. It's quite dangerous because it ignores basic connectivity and sharing of meaning and of actions and of emotions, activities and functions of our brain. Okay, so this, what Margaret Thatcher said, it's an excellent representation of the Homo economicus worldview theory that actually was incredibly individualistic. It's you, your mind, your subjective experience, and what you think is good for you. And that's about it. Okay, and now we know, of course, that this is not the case. I don't want to spend more time on this, but if you study how Margaret Thatcher was brought up, she was brought up only by her father, which of course is not a problem. The problem was that her father was an extremely rigid and an authority figure and a very austerity kind of man, you know. So the way that she was brought up kind of influenced her political views afterwards, and of course confirmed by economists and Homo economicus viewpoint. But that's not the case. As the very famous British poet in his poem said, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man or woman is a piece of the continent. And indeed, the same happens with neurons and brains as well. Brains are connected to other brains. And this connectivity, this interrelationship between my brain and yours and the others around is crucial for a healthy brain. If no connection, no healthy brain. Actually, we now know, and I will show you some experiments, the more isolated is somebody, the more the brain does not behave in a healthy way and thus does not develop the wonderful things that makes us human. Think of people in isolation. Huh? For example, in prison, you are in prison. What is the worst that can happen to you? You get into isolation. Okay, because isolation is the worst thing that I can do with your brain. Think about kids. I think there were I don't know if you've heard about the Romanian orphanage case when Ceausescu regime fell and people went in. There were some orphanages with some kids that were completely deprived from health service, I mean good food and medicine, but also from connectivity and normal play and relationships that allows you as a human being, the brain, to develop in a healthy way. Okay, so we know from many different perspectives that isolation is the worst thing that can happen to your brain. So your brain has an urge to connect to other brains in order to develop in a healthy way. Okay, so what makes us human? I know that many of you think that there are some things that we do as humans that we cannot do better than other animals, right? There are animals that can run much faster. There are animals that can fly and we cannot fly. There are animals that can breathe underwater and we cannot do. Of course, our imagination and our thinking created machines to help us do this, but still as human beings, biologically, we cannot do some things that other animals can do better. But what we can do better than other animals. And a lot of philosophers, economists, religions, educators, psychologists, believed, and other scientists believe, that what makes us human is actually our ability to think, to calculate, to analyze. And you see it here in this very nice picture, that regardless what will happen, we will always win from chess, from even our closest primates, our closest cousins in human nature. Even with them, that they are closer to us brain-wise, we can still very easily win over them because of our analytical thinking. But I want to challenge this. Is this really the analytical thinking that makes us different? Or something that actually guides the analytical thinking? Because if the analytical thinking is the only thing that makes us different, then AI can indeed do it better than us. Not now, maybe in the future. And indeed, a lot of machines that we have created, they are much better in cognitive functions, okay, than humans. Already, maybe the primate here did not win in a game of chess towards us, but Big Blue, the IBM computer, won over humans. So if we think that what makes us human is cognitive analytical abilities, then AI can do it better. But there is a huge trap here. When we only have the analytical thinking without the deeper empathetic and other networks to guide the analysis, we end up doing worse, much worse than ever before. Now, a few years ago, Microsoft created an AI chatbot that learned from Twitter discussions how to behave as a human in its own Twitter. So actually this bot had its own Twitter account, and Microsoft created the AI learning machine behind in order to allow for the bot to learn very fast from many Twitter feeds around the world, and based on this learning to have its own Twitter feed. You know what happened by the end of the day? It became a racist bot, and they had to plug it off. Okay, so if you follow the school of thought, these people that express the opinion that what makes us human is actually our analytical thinking, and this analytical thinking is a very technical, mechanical 1 + 1, and of course not just 1 + 1, more complex algorithms, then technology can do this and can replicate the behavior of a human being. That's wrong. If you follow this school of thought, please reconsider, because there are other deeper brain processes that our thinking and our analytics are not in a vacuum. Our thinking and our analytics are not a separate person. Although, you know, René Descartes, many centuries ago said, mind different, body different. Mind is abstract alone, and this is what most people follow that believe that AI can replicate human beings. They believe that the mind is separate. It has its own rules. It is fantastic. It is without borders, limitless. The sky is the limit. It can have, you know, as much as calculative power as it can. And this is what makes us human. And body is the biology, is the meat, is the blood, is the dirt, is the animalistic background. This is very old thinking. This duality, this dualism, that mind is different and body is different. The more evidence we have, of course, now is that's not the case. The mind is a property of the body. And since the mind is a property of the body, meaning of the brain, the mind is guided by the body. When the body is taken out and the mind is alone, this is the conclusion. This is the result. A Twitter account, very clever, with much stronger cognitive abilities than a human being, analytical capacity and learning capacity, it became racist less than 24 hours, and they have to take it out. Because if you don't have morality, empathy, and connectivity, which is driven by deeper brain structures, then you become the worst version of humanity. Okay, this is something I want you to remember throughout the lecture. So let's a little bit contest the fact that what makes us human is working memory and cognitive abilities. I will show you a video from BBC. What is this video? It is this primate, emu, in Japan, which is put to perform a working memory test. And these emu primates, they are competing with humans. Now, working memory is a very important aspect of cognition, okay? It's a very important aspect of our intelligence. Let's see who wins. Okay, let's watch the video to see who wins from the two, the primate or humans. Probably you will be able to listen to hear the sound of the video. If not, please let me know. Even when the institute trained their best students to compete with the emu still won. So working memory, although it is very important for human cognition, is not unique to human cognition. And actually it seems that we are not even the best of it. And now you might say, but Nikos, this is just photographic memory, which is not in working memory. By the way, maybe they have just better memory for us, but our perception is better. Really, our perception is better? What if I tell you that the pigeon has better perception of reality than us? So there is this fantastic study where a Japanese scientist trained a pigeon to recognize work of art. So the pigeon was trained to recognize the difference between Picasso and Monet. Okay, which are very different. And every time that the pigeon was getting correct, of course, was getting a reward. It's very important for instrumental conditioning, for learning, okay? So this is not so interesting. What is interesting is that then the scientists were started showing to the pigeon other works by Monet and other works by Picasso, and see if now the pigeon, not with photographic memory, recreate the one work that it was trained on, but others which actually show it needs much better perception. And indeed, the pigeon could do it. And not only this, then he started showing to the pigeon different artists, not now Monet and Picasso, but different style, and try to see if the pigeon could recognize which one is which. And indeed, the pigeon could do it most of the times. And then the scientists did something fantastic. He created a competition between the pigeon and art college students. Who won? The pigeon. Okay, so all the things that we think that we have much better than the animal kingdom, maybe some of them we don't have as good as the animal kingdom as we think. Okay, now the pigeons is an interesting example because the military has used pigeons, to recognize man-made artifacts which are camouflaged from aerial photography. So when the spy plane flies above, let's say, a jungle and take pictures, the pigeon was much better in detecting in the picture a man-made object than the best analysts from the army. Surprised? It's amazing. Okay, so together with analytical thinking, the other thing, which is very much, of course, related, the other phenomenon that we think that it makes us human, distinctively human, and especially that feeds into the theory of Homo economicus, is consciousness. Okay, metacognition, our ability to think that we think. Not only we are aware that my food is there, my friend is there, and the car is coming to hit me. Okay, not this basic level of awareness, cognition, but meta-awareness or metacognition. The fact that when all the experience will pass, I will sit in the night and I will think, I will reflect, I will, and this is why we are called Homo sapiens sapiens. Okay, those that think. So it's this metacognition, our ability to reflect and add thinking on the awareness, meta-thinking, and say, hey, why does all this happen? And this meta-thinking, metacognition was a major argument for the Homo economicus theorists to say, aha, this is what makes us distinctively human, and this is the important thing, makes us distinctively individualistic. The fact that you have thoughts for yourself, and these thoughts that are unique to you, and you experiencing these thoughts uniquely and in an individual way, separate way in your own mind, makes you you. This was let's say, a traditional concept of consciousness. But now we start understanding that that's not true. Actually, it's exactly the opposite. Consciousness evolved for the greater good, not just for the self. Look at here what it says. The unconscious mind tricks you into believing in a sense of self. Okay, and why does it trick you? Now, this is the important thing. Consciousness simply occurs too late to affect the outcomes that we thought it does. For those of you that have seen my other webinars, or you come to my lectures or to my keynotes or to my open classes, you probably have heard me saying that there are constant experiments in neuroscience that prove that our brain takes a decision many seconds before we are even aware of the fact that we are taking a decision. This started in 1980s with somebody called Benjamin. He was called. Let me remember. It will come back to me. A very famous experiment that proved that when we have to take a decision, and the moment we take the decision and we press A or B, because the scientist asks us to press A or B wearing electroencephalogram, at this moment where we become aware, the electroencephalogram picked up electric activity that was before we are conscious and could predict our decision from half a second up to 2.5 seconds before we become aware of it. Okay, Benjamin Libet was the scientist. So Benjamin Libet made this very famous experiment in which he first started seeing glimpses of the brain unconsciously taking the decision before we were even aware that we indeed decided to press A or B. And this is a seminal experiment in neuroscience that since then not only has been repeated and proven, but it has been expanded. And there was one latest experiment last year that took this unconscious decision making of the brain up to 11 seconds before we are aware of the decision. So consciousness is not about decisions. You have the illusion you are taking the decisions. The decision is already taken up to 11 seconds before in your brain. So if consciousness is not evolved to take decisions, why is it there? So the article you see here, it says that since consciousness simply occurs too late to affect the outcomes of the mental processes, so since consciousness is not where decision making is taken, this is observed in the brain before, and there is very little debate in neuroscience about that. Okay, so if the decision is taken before, then why do we need to rethink our thoughts? Why do we need to have meta consciousness? And one very popular theory is what you see on your screen. We suggest that consciousness is the product of the unconscious mind. You remember there's no mind-body dualism. Mind is a part of the body, okay, and provides an evolutionary advantage that which developed for the benefit of the social group, not the individual. These guys is the biggest twist, one of the biggest twists in human understanding and in science. For centuries, millennia, we thought that we were individuals with individual consciousness that made us take individual thoughts. And all this was for me, myself, and I. The Homo economicus model is a very self-centered, individualistic model. And indeed, it feels like that, but that's not the reality. Consciousness, it seems, there are other theories, of course, consciousness, it seems, it's developed for the we, not for the I. Since the brain takes a decision, what is the role of consciousness? And we have a lot of evidence that indicate that the role of consciousness is actually not to take a decision, but to see how maybe this decision will be applied better in relation to you, not to me, to you. So whatever decision I will take or my brain will take unconsciously, when it comes to become a behavior, a reality, what kind of information I can get from you through the empathy networks in order to fine-tune, to come back and analyze and see what will be the best to do in terms of our relationship, in terms of your actions impact to me and my actions impact to you. This is, as I said, one of the most interesting twists in human history. Okay, so consciousness is what connects us, not what separates us. This comes out from something that is called the argumentative theory of reason. It is one of the most popular and most impactful theories of psychology in the last 10 years, and it's a very strong one. Reasoning is our ability not to make cold analytical decisions, but to be able to have arguments to convince each other to do the things we want each other to do. So consciousness, argumentation, logic is not for some abstract cold process and goal, but to create common action. Okay, and if you think about it, everything that we do as humans is based on common action. Even individual sports like Djokovic. If Djokovic doesn't have the right team, and indeed a few years ago he had the person in his team that we think that didn't have a good impact on Djokovic. Djokovic started losing, not playing very well, changed the team, he's in the top of his game. Even the very individualistic sports are a product of a team. Of course, everything else is a product of a team. Even you going out from your home in the morning and taking the bus. Okay, I think bus is restarted in Belgrade, right? I saw that. So even taking the bus, this means that there is a group of people that need to coordinate, to collaborate for you to take the bus. Okay, so as many neuroscientists, Luis Cozzolino is another one, says the brain and the body are biological organisms. They are social organisms, such as the neuron in the brain is a social organism. It needs to connect with other neurons. We are only beginning to realize we are not separate beings. We are really all just members of a hive, and probably it will take humanity a few centuries to realize how our brains are interconnected. The good thing is that we already have a lot of research on it. Why Homo sapiens is here and not Neanderthals? Were we more clever? No. The cleverness, the cognitive analytical ability we have as Homo sapiens helped us be more collaborative and what we call hyper-prosociality. Not a learned tendency, a genetically encoded trait that helps a species to dominate to other species. This means that our ability to think and overthink sometimes serves a social purpose, a common purpose, a collaboration purpose. It was Homo sapiens that managed to organize better and collaborate better, tribe with tribe, to attack a tribe of Neanderthals or steal the resources or create a zone around their own food and not allow Neanderthals the space to grow. So collaboration is the basic hardwired tendency of our brain, and empathy is the way to achieve collaboration. Okay, The René Spitz experiment in 1945 in a New York orphanage. René Spitz did a very interesting experiment. He went to the orphanage, and the orphanage was the best that New York had. Excellent for the time health, medical, food, nutrition. The babies had the best support concerning the things that I mentioned. And he observed 90 babies. He compared this with 90 babies he observed in prison. Now you might tell me, Nikos, how can a baby be in prison? Okay, the baby cannot be in prison, of course, because of the baby. It's the mother, okay, that was in prison. So imagine the contrast between the most well-organized orphanage and being a baby with a mother in prison. No good medical access to good medical and health services, not good health conditions, not the best nutrition food. Out of 90 babies in the orphanage and 90 babies in the prison, how many babies survived the next year where he went to see who is alive and who is not? All babies in prison were still alive. 34 babies in the best orphanage died. Why? It doesn't make sense, but the babies in the orphanage were isolated. It was early in medical history, so they even thought that the viruses, the seasonal viruses, they jump from one baby to another. So they were keeping even babies in complete isolation in order not a virus to pass from one baby to another. So very little human connectivity. And when we don't have human connectivity, we die. Is as simple as that. This is why we have the attachment theory. Maybe you've heard it, John Bowlby's attachment theory. John Bowlby studied normal baby and toddler development, mental health, emotional health, well-being, and he found out that the babies that were more cared for, even physically, skin to skin, more touched with their parents, and had this more loving and comforting from the parents, had a much more stable and healthy development when they were adults. Okay, and this is the very now popular in parenting attachment theory, which is exactly the opposite from the theory of let the baby cry it out. Have you heard of this? If you have babies or some friends of you have babies, you know that you have these opposites. Either attachment theory, the baby cries, I immediately go to comfort it, to hug it, to give it love and support. Or you have the exactly opposite theory, which is no, let the baby cry alone. It will learn to be stronger. And it did. The babies learn to be stronger if you let them alone to cry, but then they develop more suicidal tendencies, they're more unstable in their own social relationships or personal relationships, etc., etc. So they might be more sharks and achieve more professionally, but emotionally and mentally, they might have more problems. So be careful which theories you follow. Okay, be careful. And of course, we have many studies again in nature. There was a very interesting study that took the alpha gorilla from a gorilla community, a gorilla tribe, and they were putting in front of this gorilla a meat, food. And then they were giving next to the gorilla another part of his tribe. And what they were observed, they wanted to see when did the gorilla give more meat to the other gorilla. You know what the interesting thing they found? That the more lower status of the other gorilla next to the alpha gorilla, the more the gorilla was sharing food. The more similar the status, the more the gorilla was keeping the food. What does this teach us about? What does it teach us about leadership, about caring? You know what great leaders do? They care more for the people that are more in need. The more we don't give a damn, we exclude, we fire, the people that are more in need, the more we don't develop biological leadership connectivity with other people. So let's talk about empathy. Now, empathy, it's very interesting for many reasons. One of these is, following the logic of what we have been discussing up to now, empathy is central to what makes us human. Empathy, our ability to recognize emotions into others, intentions into others, thoughts into others, our ability, unconsciously and consciously, we will discuss it, is central to what makes us human, and it's a central force of leading our analytics, our cognitive thoughts, our consciousness. So as we said, consciousness and analytics and thinking, they're not in a vacuum. They come from the mass and the inner workings of our brain. And what guides, what gives food to all this? It's empathy. Okay, no empathy, no deeper connectivity, no deeper understanding of another person. You become like the AI that we discussed of Microsoft's AI that turned out to be a racist by the end of the day. Okay. However, there is a problem. We have an empathy deficit. As Obama said in 2006, he went to talk to a university to the graduates. He was not the president still. Okay. He said we are actually experiencing an empathy deficit. And indeed, we have data measuring empathy in the Western world that shows that empathy is decreasing quite a lot. Actually, I will show you the empathy deficit. This is the empathy deficit. And there is data saying that these last 4 years, there is even a more steep, a more drastic drop of empathy. Something is happening in the Western world, and we don't allow our natural empathy networks to work. On the contrary, we inhibit. This is actually what Obama said, that we live in very individualistic societies, that the most important thing you have to do as a young person is get more money, become more beautiful, and have more pleasure for you, go for holidays and all this. We don't teach our kids to be team players, to have empathy and connectivity, and try to understand the different other. On the contrary, when you see somebody who is different, you try more to be an in-group, a knee-jerk reaction, and completely go into a conflict mode. And Obama said that's a mistake. And it's not, of course, only Obama. We have a lot of research. And of course, when empathy goes down, what goes up? Narcissism. And if you see these two graphs, the one on top of the other, exactly how, while the empathy score drops, narcissistic personality inventory increases. Because that is what's happening when you don't have empathy. You only care about yourself. Okay, and of course there's now a new score, very interesting score that shows it's a little bit complicated algorithm. I will show you the algorithm. I don't intend for you to understand it immediately or to work with it, but it's good for you to know that we have new algorithms to understand your empathy, the empathy deficit. And the new algorithm is called selfie per hour. Of course, I'm joking, but I'm half joking, because how many selfies you take per day, it has been found that it is an indication of the narcissistic tendency. Okay, there is research, for example, that connects your Facebook behavior and where you stand in the narcissistic inventory index. Okay, so indeed, social media, and some of them even by design, promote more our egocentric and narcissistic tendencies instead of our empathetic connectivity and compassionate ones. Okay, and as I said, empathy is very natural to our brain. We are actually born with empathy networks, but because of what is called neuroplasticity in the brain, the ability of the brain to change every day, its connections and its structure, we can decrease our empathy or we can increase our empathy. Look, for example, what you remember this guy Breivik, that in Norway he killed 64 students in an island where they had a summer retreat, in a specific summer retreat of the youth of a political party. And he went there with machine guns and he killed 64 kids. Look what he said. He said that he was fully capable of empathy, but he has used a meditation technique to override empathy. And he said, if you are going to be capable of executing such a bloody horrendous operation, you first need to work on your mind, your psyche for years. This is one of the most transparent evidence and strong evidence that we can allow our brains to develop healthy empathy connections, but we can also inhibit our empathy, stop our normal, natural empathy networks, and become monsters. It's possible. The fact that we're capable of empathy doesn't mean that empathy will be there forever. We have to be very careful of allowing empathy to develop and work, and not do exactly the opposite, fighting our empathy and trying to decrease it. So we can train our brains to become monsters, but also we can train our brains to become empathy masters. Like, if you like the sayings and the ideas of Gandhi, he was actually very strong on this, of how we should allow our empathy and compassion to take over and not the opposite psychopathic effects of our behavior. So yes, we can all be normal people, no damaged brain. We can become monsters or we can become empathy masters. Okay, and this is very important, not only for our personal life. The Fortune 100 best companies to work for in 2015, the 2015 edition actually found out that top talent, you know, we have the war on talent now globally, choose companies that foster strong and rewarding relationships among the employees. And the natural way to foster strong and rewarding relationships between people is empathy. So not only the leader to have empathy towards the workers, the employees, the team, but the team, you as a leader have to create the environment, the conditions by which empathy will grow and will be nurtured within your team. Okay, there are 3 types of empathy. This is one of the things that unfortunately not many people talk about. We say empathy and it's kind of like empathy is one thing. Empathy is not one thing. There are at least 3 different types of empathy. Let's see them. Cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. Cognitive empathy is what we mostly refer as empathy. Your ability to step cognitively into somebody else's shoes and analytically, it's a thinking process. It takes effort. It's slow. Okay, thinking fast and slow. It's a slow process by which when you see somebody, you stop and say, what is this person thinking or feeling or is about to do? Okay, it's a cognitive process. It needs you to stop and think in order to analyze the cues and the situation you get from the person and derive a conclusion of what you think this other person is thinking. As I said, theory of mind. Okay, and of course you cannot do this with a stone. Let's say I pick up a stone from the street. You cannot say, this stone, what is it thinking? You cannot have theory of mind for things. Of course you can have them for your pet as well. You know, what is your dog thinking and wants to do? So it's me creating a thought, an analysis, okay, an analytical process and a conclusion of what you are about to do or what you are feeling. Let's do a small experiment to see if you have this. There are 2 girls, Sally and Anne. Sally has a marble, red marble, and she puts it in her basket. And then Sally leaves, goes to the toilet. So Anne goes to the basket, picks up the red marble and puts it in the box. Then Anne leaves the room. Sally comes back. Where should Sally look for her marble? Okay, so Sally came back. So Sally now will go and take her marble. Where should she look for? The basket or the box? Who of you says the basket? Who says the box? Of course, Sally will look in her basket because Sally was outside the room when Anne changed the place of the marble. But who knows that the marble is not there? Anne, but Anne left. And who else? We. So if you said box, you projected your own understanding of reality to Sally's perception. So you said, if I know that it's there, everybody knows. This is the opposite of cognitive empathy. In cognitive empathy, you have to realize that your understanding of the world is not the same as the understanding of the world of somebody else. It's the very humane action of saying, you know what? Your reality is different than my reality. So in order to understand you, I need to understand your reality and not just to take my reality and put it on your reality. This is a very simple test to see, where you stand in cognitive empathy. And of course, most adults, most kids fail, 80%, but 45% of adults fail as well because it requires effort. We live our lives so fast. We are entrepreneurs, members of family, we do so many things. Not always we can step back and say, hey, I'm projecting my feelings now. I'm projecting my wants. Let's stop a little bit. This is not what this person actually wants. Let me find out. Okay. So what blocks cognitive empathy? This is one study I will show you. And then we will go to finish with some basic tips of how to improve your empathy. So what blocks cognitive empathy? Let's do an experiment. I will stop sharing the screen. Okay. Do you see me? You see me? Okay. Can I see you too? Some of you, can you switch on your camera? Whoever wants, just switch on the camera. I'll try to see as many as I can from you. Okay. I have to see you though, your face. This is a very interesting experiment. Okay. Can you please take your finger like this? Good. Okay. Can you put your finger on the middle of your forehead? Okay. And now, can you please draw on your forehead the capital letter, English capital letter E? E, we would say, elephant. So you have to draw now the capital letter E. E. Elephant. Electricity. Okay. Give it one try. Just do something else. Okay. So, how many ways do we have to draw this? Which are the two basic ways we have to draw it? There are actually two ways to draw the letter. One is to draw it like that, and the other is to draw it like that. Which of the two is the most empathetic way? If I draw it like this, who can read it? Me or you? If I draw it like this, it's like I'm seeing it written in front of me, so it is Nikos-centric. If I draw it like this, it's not how I would read it, it's how you would read it. So if intuitively you wrote it like this means you are in a more self-centered mindset at the moment. If you did it like that, this means you are in a more empathetic, because intuitively you thought that you did it in a way for the others to read it, not you. So there are many interesting experiments like that you can even do with your team in the morning, okay, in order to see if they're in an empathetic mode or not. Of course, if you drew it in a way or another, you can change it later on during the day, depending on what happens to you. So keep this experiment. And now, unfortunately, I will not go too much into emotional empathy and behavioral empathy, because I want to have 5 minutes to show you some specific tips of how to make sure you allow your empathy to be functioning and nurtured and growing during the day. We'll have another webinar, maybe when the lockdown finishes, face-to-face, to go on all the 3 types of empathy. So let me just find the slides and go through the tips. I just want to show you that the difference between the 3 types of empathy. First, here we discussed the cognitive empathy, okay, but it's not only cognitive empathy. We said that there are other types of empathy. If I have to summarize the different types of empathy, is cognitive empathy is you consciously trying to decode and analyze what somebody else is feeling or thinking. So it's an analytical process. There is emotional empathy, where it's not about analyzing, but it's mirroring, experiencing in you the emotion of somebody else. So if a friend of yours cries, immediately you cry. It's not thinking, it's an automatic, unconscious emotional response. You see your friend angry or your colleague angry, you become angry also. Say, why are we angry? This is called emotional empathy. It has other names as well. It's called emotional synchronization or emotional contagion. These are different parts of the brain than the first type of empathy. And there is a third type of empathy, which is a compassionate empathy or behavioral empathy. In the behavioral empathy, you don't think, you don't feel, you immediately help. It's this urge when you walk down the street and you see a person falling in front of you, you don't think, is this person hurt? You don't feel pain because they felt pain. You immediately, in a knee-jerk reaction, you go down to help. So there are 3 different types of empathy with different types of neural networks that makes empathy so interesting. So how can you improve all this? Let's finish with few practical ways to make sure your empathy works. The golden rule, you've heard it, treat others the way you would like to be treated. That's not empathetic. Why this is not empathy, but it's egocentric? Because it has this small word you. So if I want to be treated in a specific way, and I try to impose to you the way that I want to be treated, this means I'm not taking your perspective. You remember when we were talking about Sally and Anne? If you said that Sally should look in the basket while Sally was not here, you are imposing your view on reality to the view of reality on somebody else. It's a very basic mistake on not applying empathy. The same is the golden rule. So now we have what is called the platinum rule. Don't treat others how you would like to be treated. Treat others how they would like to be treated. Okay, I guess this is the tagline of S&M services around the world. Okay, if you know what I mean. Also, experiencing the world in a different way. Experiencing. So there is this this NGO called Artomacy that makes you blindfolded and takes you into museums with another guide. The guide has to tell you, explain the experience, what they see, and you are a blindfolded person. And then you take out the mask and you go again and you see how you connected with this other person, in order to experience through his and her eyes the museum. Okay. They're very, the rotation in companies is something like this. The fact that you take one employee maybe from back office and you put this employee on retail for one day, this is because you want this person to experience life as being on retail. Okay, so rotation is a good empathetic tool. Experience. Second, our brain has not evolved to connect with numbers. If you are looking every day into a screen with bars, graphs, pie charts, and you think you can empathize with your customers or your employees, forget it. Forget it. That's not how the brain works. You need to see faces, to talk to people. You cannot replace. Okay, you cannot substitute human connectivity with a screen, Excel, and pie charts. It just doesn't happen. We know it in many ways, but one amazing way that we know this is that this guy, that he lost his father through cancer, and he found out that actually when he took an X-ray of his father for some other condition, and he took this to the radiologist to see this X-ray, the radiologist did not notice also the cancer. He only focused on the problem that was the reason why the person took the X-ray. So this guy, he tried to find, this is called, by the way, incidental finding in medical profession. And millions of people die per year because of doctors not being trained to identify incidental findings. They are just focusing on the thing that they were asked to look for, and would save much more lives. Okay, so what this guy did, and it's really amazing, he did a very simple brain hack. He put on the X-ray of the patient a picture of the patient. That's it. So when the radiologist or the doctor gets the X-ray, on the front, it's the picture of the patient. Only by having the picture of the patient, incidental findings increased by 60%. That's magic. 60% increasing of incidental findings only by having a face in front of the X-ray. How does this trick the brain? The face activates empathetic networks on the brain. So when they open the X-ray, this is not just a mechanical view of this. Just let me check another one. You know, doctors are and the medical staff are overworked. So they're not really engaging their brain. They just see what they have to see and they go to the next one. By having just the picture, the empathy networks went online and lives were saved. So when you see a data, your brain cannot engage empathy. You cannot really connect with your customers, your employees, and anybody else. You need to add real photos and meet with real people. Okay. And this is a picture from the coronavirus. You know what is this? These are doctors and medical staff that they printed and they put their pictures in front of them when they are treating the patients. Why? To connect empathetically. This is absolutely brilliant. This is a brain, a simple but so amazing brain hack that we can do in order to develop better empathetic relationships. Another trick, virtual reality. There was a study by Stanford Research that found out that when they were wearing virtual reality masks to people, and the things that they were experiencing was actually ready to lose their jobs and to become homeless, their empathy scores for the homeless increased drastically. The same happened with refugee camps. You remember the big refugee crisis from a few years ago? People that were given VR and they were showing how the refugees were living in the refugee camps. There were people that after the VR experience said, we need to help them. So living the experience of somebody else in life or through VR helps you develop more empathetic networks. Couple of more hacks and we're finishing. Have you heard of this guy? This African American guy down there that sits next to the Ku Klux Klan member? This is one of the best stories you will ever hear. This African American guy, he's a blues musician. He wanted to understand why some people that are racists, of course, and white supremacists join Ku Klux Klan, and they have so much hate against other races. And he did something very simple. He started talking to them in bars, in restaurants, buying dinners, going to their homes, developing a friendship. More than 200 Ku Klux Klan members changed, empathized with him, and they left the Ku Klux Klan. And it's amazing. It's called Daryl Davis. You can catch his story online in many podcasts. It's really one of the most inspiring stories. By sitting down and discussing person to person and addressing with an openness, an open heart, and honest inquiry, more than 200 members changed their hearts, which is the brain, okay, because the heart just pumps blood. The more you isolate yourself, the more you close yourself in a confirmation bias and preference balloon. We call it the preference online balloons. You are not going to empathize. The more and more you will be like this Breivik guy. The more you connect with others and you try to create rapport and talk with them, the more your brain engages normal, healthy, empathetic networks, even if you are in Ku Klux Klan, which is amazing. Okay, the last thing I want to share with you is we have enough evidence that reading literature improves your empathy. So you might be reading books about how to become a better salesperson, how to present better, the 10 rules of presentation. All this is fantastic. Please go and read literature. Why? By reading literature, you relive the story that you read. You connect with the characters. When they have pain, you have pain. When they do something, you say, why did they do this? Cognitive empathy. You engage cognitive empathy. You engage emotional empathy. You sometimes want to go into the novel and kick some people out. Compassionate empathy, behavioral empathy. So reading literature, reading and connecting with art is a very nice way to treat your brain in a way to engage in empathy. Okay, I promised in the beginning to show you something that we do in my neuromarketing practice. We indeed have developed neuroscientific protocols with electroencephalograph, as you see there, and we measure in companies your level of empathy. Now, I wrote a blog post on this on my LinkedIn account. You see down there, go to that, see what we do, how we use neuroscience to actually give you a score of how your brain engages empathy networks, especially emotional empathy, mirroring empathy, and we compare this with your cognitive empathy. So we show you some people and we ask you to just look at the pictures. We measure at the specific time how your brain synchronizes emotionally with the people you see. And then we ask you also cognitively, what were these emotions? And then we compare and we can tell you if your emotional empathy is stronger or if your cognitive empathy is stronger. Okay, this is very, very cutting edge. We call it neuro HR. Okay, neuro HR. So I want to finish by saying that we need to start working with our kids. There is an NGO called The Roots of Empathy. It's Canadian. It exists in many countries. They go to schools and try to increase empathy to our school kids, to our students. When they perform their exercises to increase empathy, students are more satisfied from their school. Bullying decreases and miraculously, academic achievement also goes up. You remember what I said at the beginning? Mind or body, thinking, and your empathy networks. Your empathy networks are basic human networks that create the mindset, the way that you see reality, and the way that you apply your logic. But it's the roots, it's the starting point, it's the main engine by which all these other things come out. If your empathy is broken, everything else will come out broken. If your empathy is strong, everything else has the chance also to come out in a very healthy and compassionate way. Okay, I will just mention one very interesting fact. There is studies that showing that in the West, I think I mentioned this in my previous webinar with MChem, there is evidence that up to 6 years old in the West, we have the same empathy capacity as kids in or scores in Far East. After 6 years old, in the West, empathy starts falling, and in some other parts of the world, keeps rising. What happens in 6 years old? We go to school. The way that we have organized school, the way that we teach our kids to only focus on some specific functions of the brain, the more we inhibit, the more we decrease, the more we weaken the empathy networks of the brain. We urgently need to change, and starts from schools, universities, and of course companies. Okay, so start building your empathy today, and I'm confident that if we build our empathy, we will not only become better people, we will not help each other in these difficult times, but we will create also a better society and a better world for everybody. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found it interesting. If you have any questions and you shared it through your through the chat, I'm here to answer.
There is one question in chat. I think that you already answered it, but maybe you can repeat it. Whether we are born with empathy or we get it through our life.
So we are born with empathy. Empathy is a very basic building block of a healthy human brain. Okay, but what happens through life can say to the brain, don't use empathy. You see, you were empathetic and you were hurt. So experiences through life teach the brain to continue developing and using empathy, or to stop with empathy. Okay, so we have to be very careful to monitor things that happen in our lives and the lives of people around us, that they don't harm the empathy. Because at the end of the day, the brain is an organ that develops strategies for our everyday life. And there is learning that say to the brain, this is a good strategy, this is a bad strategy. For example, kids that have been severely abused when they were young, their brain says empathy is not good. Why should I feel sorry for somebody since the person that abused me was not feeling sorry? So I will not feel sorry. And they diminish their empathetic capacity for later in life. This is why many will tell you that somebody that was abused when he was young, the possibility for them to abuse people later is higher. They will not do it 100%, but the possibility is higher.
Do we have questions?
I see something very interesting. Somebody said you can draw E like this, you can draw E like this, but you can draw it like this. But this is another letter, I think, the sh or something in Serbian. So.
We have one question. Can a person have too much empathy?
Oh, excellent question. Excellent question. Actually, I had a slide in this in between, especially in emotional empathy. Okay, so emotional empathy is your or automatic recreation in you of something that somebody else is feeling or experiencing. Okay, you don't think, you don't act, you are actually experiencing the emotion. And this can be, if it is very high, it can be incapacitating. Means, if you cry every time that somebody else is crying, you will never help them. You will stay crying. Or it can increase your stress, because if every time that you are present to a very emotionally intense situation, and you immediately also you feel emotionally intense, this can create, as I said, an incapacity to respond and then create stress in you. This is why neuroscientists like Richard Davidson, that also found this phenomenon, he said that always a little distance help. Okay, a little distance. So yes, you could have too much, or you could also have too much cognitive empathy. You know who are the best in cognitive empathy? They analyze you perfectly. They provide an X-ray from up, down, and they fully get you without any interruptions from emotions or morality, or who are excellent in cognitive empathy. But they are not good at all in emotional and in compassionate behavior. Psychopaths. Psychopaths are excellent in cognitive empathy because they don't have any interference of basic moral and emotions like remorse, like feeling sorry or a pity. They stay in the, and they're very manipulative, of course. So they stay in the back and say, what is Nikos feeling now? How can I take advantage of it? Okay. So yes, you could also have too much cognitive empathy if you're a psychopath.
So the high sense of empathy can hurt us if we
yes. Now
know how to deal with it. Yeah.
Correct. That's very, very, very important. But also have in mind that these extreme cases, too much empathy or too little empathy or too much cognitive empathy, these are in the sides of the bell curve. So these are very extreme cases, and they're found in a very small part of the population. Most of the population, the distribution, the normal distribution is that we have the right type of and level of empathy. Okay, of course, it depends how our brain learns to let it more or less. But it's a very, I mean, in the total population, the distribution of psychopaths is 1 to 3%, so it's very small. So, just to summarize,
yeah,
what makes us human is not thinking, is what guides thinking. What guides thinking, of course, there are many things that guide thinking in the brain, all the seminars that we do is about this, but one of the building blocks of what guides our thinking is actually empathy. And empathy is important because actually now we know that decision making is taken before in the unconscious up to 11 seconds than in the conscious. So this creates a problem for traditional theories of what makes us human and what makes me me. The traditional view was my thinking, my individuality, my separate cost-benefit and egocentric decision making in my own mind is what makes us human. Since decision is before, we have a big question: what is conscious doing? The most popular now uprising theory is that conscious is there not for me but for us. It is really the upside down of what we were believing, and the biggest twist, one of the biggest twists in human history. But it makes empathy even more important. What is also very important is not that you are born with empathy, but because of neuroplasticity you can increase it or decrease it. Which empathy? There are 3 types of empathy: cognitive, analyzing the other person. There is emotionally automatic connection, and there is behavioral. You actually help somebody before you think anybody. And how can you improve empathy? Art, literature, experiences other people's lives, either through VR or in reality rotation, in companies, putting a face in front of numbers, sometimes being as extreme as closing your eyes and trying to understand what is happening like a blind person. So there is a lot of research that actually now can help us in a very reliable way to make sure that our empathy networks are up and running. So thank you very much that participated. Indeed, the crisis is still unfolding. I'm not sure if the worst is in the past, I hope, but we're not completely out of the woods yet. So by understanding empathy, by using empathy, by trying to help yourself and the people around you experience empathy, not only will help us in the crisis, but will make a better world after the crisis. So thank you so much for having me for a second time. All the best, and hope, Tina, will meet you and your wonderful team and our participants next time face to face.
I hope so. Okay.
Thank you
Thank you,
very much.
everyone. Thank you. Bye.